There's an X on the floor right here. And I put this over top of it, and it says, that way Steve doesn't walk out of the camera. It's just a basic thing. Hey, it's almost Halloween. I thought I'd dress up like a normal pastor. Close as I can come, so anyway, one of the things about our church is, well, we're a little bit obnoxious here, but we try not to be obnoxious in our community. We don't go out and annoy people, and we don't spend a lot of time knocking on doors and going places and making it uncomfortable. But what would be cool is, since we don't go to people's doors and invite them to church, it would be cool if we get them to come to our doors. Wouldn't that be sweet if people just show up at your door and knock and you could invite them to church? I think that'd be really sweet. What we could do is we could encourage them by giving them candy. We get all the kids to come to our house and we give them candy, and so I think that would work really well, and we'll make it a holiday. And so we'll call it Halloween, and everybody in the community, all their kids, they'll bring their kids to our doors, and what we've done is we've made up little business card size things, and it's just the name of the church. I think it might have our website on it. Nothing obnoxious, just a little bit saying we're here, okay? And if you've been here for very long at all, more than 1 year of this, there is a rule, though, if you want to take any of the cards and hand them out. We don't give them to just anybody to hand out. You have to make an agreement with us. You have to make a pact with us that if you're going to give out our cards with our name and our logo on it, what do you have to do? People been here a while? Good candy. Okay? If we get word that somebody is taking our cards and giving out candy corn, there will be repercussions. And we have spies in the community. They're little kids dressed up like whatever. Okay? Word will get back that somebody gave out our cards with candy corn. If that's the case, we will come down hard on you. Okay? So when you get the cards on your way out, we hand those out. Just get as many as you need to just drop it with the really good candy, Snickers bars, stuff like that, into the thing. Drop it in there, non-obnoxious. Great way to let everybody know we're here, okay? Just let you know that's coming. We're also, this week, as you may have heard, we're starting our marriage series. We do this every fall. Marriage is challenging anywhere. Add a dose of high military content like we have, and it gets even more fun. So every time about this time of year, I do 3 weeks on marriage. Now, this year, something has happened. I don't know if you heard this or not. But Nicholas Sparks, the guy who wrote The Notebook, the guy who has inflicted immense suffering on so many men. Yes, honey, it's a wonderful movie. He and his wife separated. Now, I don't want to look down on somebody else's pain, but could it be that his idea of what it takes to make a relationship successful doesn't work? That the whole concept of waiting in the rain for the right person to show up on a horse and rescue you, that spending your life looking around the world for that mysterious soulmate who will make me complete, that might be there's a theological term for that, a load of crap? Yeah. And could it be, now this is going to freak you out, could it be that if we actually look at the one who invented marriage, God, and we look at what he teaches us about it, we might actually find ways to be successful in our marriages, ways to define success in marriage in a way that actually works, and we might be able to actually have marriages that people want to have. Does that make sense? I think it's true. Matter of fact, today we're going to actually go look, and we're going to find 3 words in the original marriage formula, in the original marriage commitment ceremony. And those 3 words, if you just take those, unpack those, and look at those carefully, you can get most of what you need to have an amazing marriage. Okay? That's called a tease. We'll get to it in a few minutes. Okay? We're going to be in Matthew chapter 19, if you want to go ahead and turn in your Bible or turn on your Bible. And in Matthew 19, as is frequently the case, Jesus is fighting with religious people. I always feel like Jesus when he's fighting with religious people. I figure if religious people like you too much, you're doing something wrong. And if religious people don't like you at a certain level, if they're uncomfortable with you, you must be doing something a little bit right. So, Jesus is having a spat with the religious people in Matthew 19, verse 3. Some Pharisees came and tried to trap him with this question. Should a man be allowed to divorce his wife for just any reason? Now, what they're doing here, which we can't tell because we're so far away from the situation, they're actually trying to lure him into a heated debate that was going on at that time about divorce. There were two camps when it came to divorce, and by saying for any reason, the word underneath that is for any cause, they were holding up one of the options. There were two groups that were always fighting about it, and they were holding up the position of one of the groups. One of the groups held to divorce for any cause. We'll talk what that means in a few minutes. So they're saying, Jesus, would you pick a side here? Okay? Verse 4, Jesus answers. Haven't you read the scriptures? Jesus replied. That's funny. Because Pharisees' job was to read the scriptures. That's what they did for a living, was read the scriptures and debate about it. Teach others the scriptures. And he says, haven't you read the scriptures? Jesus replied, they record that from the beginning God made them male and female. And he said, this explains why a man leaves his father and mother and is joined to his wife, and the two are united into one. Since they are no longer two but one, let no one split apart what God has joined together. Then the Pharisees reply, then why did Moses say in the law that a man could give his wife a written notice of divorce and send her away? Jesus replied, Moses permitted divorce only as a concession to your hard hearts. Now, let me tell you what's going on there. Most people don't recognize this. The stuff that's in the Bible about that whole write up a certificate of divorce and give it to the woman, that was done for the woman. Okay, that was God reaching into a culture that was hard-hearted, as he said, and helping the woman out. Because if there was no certificate of divorce, the guy would say, send her away. Well, she's out there. Somebody comes up to her and says, are you married? No, I'm not married. How do you know? Well, the guy sent me away. How do I know he's not going to call tomorrow and call you back? Well, he might. Anybody going to marry a woman who the other guy might call back in a week or two? No. So she was given a certificate of divorce that said on it, this means you can marry again with no legal ramifications. You're not tied to this other guy anymore. So God gave him that to help the woman out, because a woman who was totally out there like that in that culture was in desperate situation. She couldn't marry again. She couldn't do anything. And so it was for her benefit that God gave that, because he knew hard-hearted people would divorce. He said, okay, well then how about I do this? Okay? He said, Moses permitted divorce only as a concession to your hard hearts, but it is not what God had originally intended. There's divorce, not what God's plan was. And I tell you this, whoever divorces his wife and marries someone else commits adultery unless his wife has been unfaithful. Jesus' disciples then said to him, this is the case, it's better not to marry. And Jesus says, verse 11, not everyone can accept this statement, only those whom God helps. Some are born as eunuchs, some have been made eunuchs by others, and some choose not to marry for the sake of the kingdom of heaven. Let anyone accept this who can. Let me keep reading. I got one more thing I want you to see. One day some parents brought their children to Jesus so he could lay hands on them and pray for them. But the disciples scolded the parents for bothering him. But Jesus said, let the children come to me. Don't stop them. For the kingdom of heaven belongs to those who are like these children. And he placed his hands on their heads and blessed them before he left. Now, before we get into the marriage stuff, there's a couple things here I think are really cool that Jesus is affirming. Because Jesus is affirming three different things. Marriage, but also, you'll notice that he affirms singleness as a gift from God. Now, there's two approaches to singleness that we see in our culture. One is an almost, unfortunately, Christian view that single means you're kind of second rate, you don't have all the advantages, marriage is a whole lot better, and so you're stuck being single. And Jesus says, no, if it's handled right, single is an advantage. Paul will expand on that later in the Bible and say it means you can be fully devoted to God without having to worry about a spouse. So single can be a gift from God. Okay? He also says, in a world which devalues children, which we sometimes do too, having kids is a great thing. Having kids is a blessing. Kids can be brought to me. I know in our case, we've had 3 kids, and 2 of them have been immense blessings. Now we'll let them argue about who's number 3. But he says, that's a good thing. Now, I want you to see what he says about singles and about having children. What he's saying about being single is wonderful if you're using your singleness to center your life on God. It's a very, very positive thing to be single as long as you're using your singleness to center your life on God. He then says, the last piece, children are wonderful as long as you are teaching your children to center their lives on God. Now, this isn't the family series. That'll come in the spring. But can I just throw this out here for you? There's a big difference between centering your life on God and teaching your kids to center your life on God and having God be one of the things in your child's life. And I don't mean to step on toes, but yes, I do. An awful lot of parents that I see want their kids to have God on the list somewhere of things that are important, but not to center their children on God. Barry was talking about taking the kids and picking sweet potatoes and looking for ways to help children understand and learn to center their lives on God. But that's what it's about with kids. It's not one of the things that you do with your children. Well, what do we do? We got soccer, and we got dance, and we got cheerleading, we got gymnastics, and we got God. That's not what he's saying. There's nothing wrong with those other things as long as the child's life is centered on God. Now, let me teach you a Christianese word and what it really means. The word is holy. And you see the word holy and you think, I don't know what you think. Weird stuff, right? Whoa. You know what holy means? A life that is completely centered on God. So if you want your children to be holy, you teach your children to be fully centered on God. He's saying if you're single and you want your life to matter as much as it could, you want your life to be centered on God, to be holy. Got that? That wasn't the sermon. That was just stuff I thought was neat that I wanted to share before the sermon. So you can't start your clocks till now. As far as measuring how long I talk, that doesn't count. That was bonus material, and you should have forwarded ahead on the CD if you didn't want to watch it, okay? Now, let's get back to this controversy. The controversy. Should a man be allowed to divorce his wife for just any reason? And that verse came from, that controversy came because the Pharisees and religious people, the rabbis, are debating back and forth what is appropriate for divorce. And there were two camps that came up. And one, as I said, was the any cause. And they all of them argued about Deuteronomy 24:1. If a man marries a woman who becomes displeasing to him because he finds something indecent about her, and he writes her a certificate of divorce, gives it to her, and sends her from his house. Now, the question was, when it was, she becomes displeasing because of something indecent, what is that? Somebody might say, adultery. She's cheating on him. Well, not in Deuteronomy. Deuteronomy is one of the first 5 books of the Bible, and in Deuteronomy there was a penalty for adultery. It was not divorce. It involved rocks and getting stoned in a way that was not pleasing to anyone. Okay? So the penalty for adultery at that era, in Deuteronomy, way back at the beginning of the Bible, was stoning. So he's not talking about adultery here. I mean, that might be included later on. As they went on in time, they realized that stoning everyone who committed adultery had a lag on the population. So they tended not to enforce that as often as they did before. So it became the primary cause for divorce. But in Deuteronomy, he's talking about something else. This thing that makes a person indecent or displeasing. And there was one group of rabbis, one group of teachers, one prominent one, who said, well, displeasing, that can mean anything. Let's say she burned supper. Well, that displeases me. If I want to, I can write a certificate of divorce and send her away. Okay? Let's say that, I don't know, over time I married this one woman, and now this woman that I have now, she's got these wrinkles on her face. I didn't order wrinkles with this order. I didn't purchase a person with wrinkles. Certificate of divorce, on your way. They said anything you wanted to do for divorce, you just picked a reason and sent them away. Okay? Now, opposed to that group was a group who said, no, there are specific causes in the Bible for divorce, and only those are valid. That makes sense. And they went to Exodus chapter 21, verse 10. And Exodus 21:10. Are you enjoying the ancient Hebrew religious rituals lecture? Okay, I know that's why you came. So, Exodus 21 is talking about slaves, specifically a man who owns slaves, and he has one slave woman. He's single, he's got one of his slaves, and she's good looking. And he likes her, so he chooses to marry her. And she, in some sense, stops being a slave and starts being his wife. But then in Exodus 21:10, if he takes another wife to himself, decides he wants another one because he doesn't have enough trouble handling one, he shall not diminish her food, her clothing, or her marital rights. And the rabbis figured, if that applies to a slave wife, how much more does it apply to a non-slave wife, right? So they looked at that and said, I see 3 reasons why you could divorce somebody. 3 valid biblical reasons for divorce. One, of course, is the adultery we just talked about. It also says not diminish her food, her clothing, or her marital rights. Well, the food and clothing, that's physical neglect. If your spouse is physically neglecting you, that would include abandoning, then there's a valid reason for divorce there. And then it says marital rights, well, that's emotional neglect or abuse. And if somebody is emotionally neglecting you, is emotionally abandoning you, then that's a valid reason for divorce. And that's the second reason. The second group said there's divorce with cause. And to start with, Jesus says, okay, there's the people who say any cause and the people who say specific causes. The people who say any cause, yeah, they're idiots. Okay? Then he kind of comes with the specific cause people, but he's not done yet. Because he then goes, haven't you read the scriptures? Jesus replied. They record that from the beginning, God made them male and female. And he said, this explains why a man leaves his father and mother, is joined to his wife, and the two are united into one. And he says, you're missing the point. You're spending your time arguing about how to divorce and whether you can divorce or when you should divorce and all the divorce stuff, when your focus shouldn't be on figuring out how to divorce somebody. It should be on figuring out how to stay married to somebody. God created marriage. It is a blessing. It is something that God gives us. And your point shouldn't be, how can I get out of it? How many loopholes can I find to get out of this relationship? And instead, move into, savor, enjoy, and love what you have as a married couple. Do you see the difference? And Jesus is, I would say my first point is that God values marriage highly, is what Jesus is saying. God thinks it's important. God thinks it's valuable. Malachi 2:14 says this, you cry out, why doesn't the Lord accept my worship? Why can't I come to God? And it says, I'll tell you why. Because the Lord witnessed the vows you and your wife made when you were young, but you've been unfaithful to her, though she remains your faithful partner, the wife of your marriage vows. And let me say this. One of the things I teach a lot to understand about the world is the universe was made by God and it reflects God's nature. Anything that God ordains or places is there, therefore, for our good. God doesn't give us his laws to make us mad, to make our lives miserable, to annoy us. He gives us his laws, his standards, his commandments, so that we can obey them, be in harmony with the universe he created, and be protected by him. In other words, anytime you're living in concordance with God's standards, you are under God's protective umbrella. I'm not saying bad stuff doesn't happen, but I'm saying even when bad stuff happens, it's happening because God is allowing it in your life to accomplish his mission and his purpose in your life. Any place where you choose not to live, and I'm not trying to be mean, but it happens to me once in a while. Anytime you choose not to live under God's protective umbrella, it's dangerous. When I say people should get married, I'm not saying it because I'm some prude. And I've got great friends that aren't married, living together. I never say a word because God does all that stuff. I can't fix anything. I'm just Steve. I just hang out. Okay? But I will say that anytime you choose not to live in that place, you're living out from under his protective umbrella, and your life is not as good as it can be if you choose to live under his umbrella. Does that make sense? Just nod, smile. Okay? So enough about that. Now, so, God values marriage highly. He wants us to live it. He created us for this. If we're married, God created us to live into this. Let me get to Nicholas Sparks for a second, because Jesus addresses Nicholas Sparks right there in verse 5. I don't know if you noticed. Did you notice us who was talking about Nicholas Sparks in verse 5? Verse 5 says, this explains why a man leaves his father and mother and is joined to his wife, and the two are united into one. And then I've got a different translation. ESV puts it this way. If I can find it again. There we go. Therefore, a man shall leave his father and his mother and hold fast to his wife, and the two shall become one flesh. Here's the thing. Marriage is about choice and commitment. That was an amen in sneeze form. It is not about white horses and dancing in the rain and pina coladas. Okay? It's not long walks on the beach. It is a commitment you make to a person. Here's the thing. You do not have a soulmate out there waiting to be found. There are 7 billion people on earth. You're not going to find them if there is. If there is a soulmate for you, your chance of finding that person is about the same as getting struck by lightning while winning the lottery. What happens is you choose a person that you are compatible with, and that person and you begin the process of becoming soulmates when you say, I do. When you choose to be committed to that person, you start the process of becoming soulmates. Ask anybody who's been married for 20, 25, 30 years. Do you love your spouse today the same way you loved them when you got married? And the answer will always be no. The love I have now is so much deeper, so much more real, so much more powerful. If they're living into the kind of marriage God wants them to have, they're always going to say, are you crazy? What we had then is like this pale comparison, a shadow of what we had at the beginning. This is how it works. You work together with your spouse. You're partnering with your spouse, as we'll talk about in a little bit. You're growing closer to your spouse. And you get to where this weird thing's going on with soulmates. I swear, this is the truth. Kim and I have been in situations where we know one of us is screwed up right now. One of us is under severe stress. One of us, things are going wrong in life, and we're not sure which one it is. I'm looking at her going, I know one of us is really messed up right now. I'm not sure whether it's you or me, though. I don't know whether I need to fix something or you need to fix something, or both of us, but we're so tightly connected, we can't even tell who screwed up the most right now, right? And that's how it works. As you grow together as a couple, as you go through the crap that naturally happens as part of life, as you grow through these cycles of life, you grow closer and closer. If you choose to do marriage God's way, you grow closer and closer together and more become more and more soulmates. The concept that you've got a soulmate waiting to show up on a horse, that's just silly. And I know people, I'm sure I know them. I can't think of one off the top of my head, thank goodness. And I definitely know of people who get a divorce because they got married and then they found out that the person they married wasn't their soulmate. And then their soulmate showed up at work. And suddenly, since God would want them to be their soulmate, God's will for their life was adultery. You would think that wasn't be the case since God came up with this top 10 list of stuff not to do and adultery made the top 10 list. You would think that his will wouldn't include adultery. Oh yeah, it doesn't. And because you're saying there is out there this magical person to whom a marriage will not be work. Okay, let's do the math. One screwed up person plus one screwed up person, in our case, equals 5 screwed up people. Okay? And adding screwed up people to the situation doesn't make the situation less screwed up. There's nobody out there who will come along and eliminate your screwed upness except Jesus Christ. And he's taking his time doing it. Okay? So the concept that you're going to find this one person who makes you complete and perfect in every way with no stress in your life, that's poppycock. Okay? It's not going to happen. That person doesn't exist. Because you have to maintain your marriage. You choose your person, you commit to your person, and you maintain your marriage. It doesn't magically happen. There's not a perfect person to whom marriage will be just the most wonderful thing in the world. I love when I say that. You can judge how long a couple's been married by how hard they laugh at that statement. The ones that are married like an hour, they go, and smile slightly, going, he doesn't know us. The ones that are married a couple years, they're going, that might be true. The ones that are married 30 years are laughing their butts off because they know how it really works. The screwed up just follows you, and you have to maintain the marriage. You have to work at the marriage wherever you are. Now, here's the cool thing. At least I think it's cool because I like history and all that junk. Remember we said there were three things that the Jewish people came up with, the leaders, the rabbis, that were valid causes for divorce. Remember it was, make sure I get it right, adultery, emotional neglect, and physical neglect. They found, in the Dead Sea Scrolls, they found marriage certificates. And apparently it was common that those three things were actually listed on marriage certificates that you were promising not to do them, not to commit adultery, not to do emotional neglect, and not to have physical neglect of your person. Matter of fact, they codified it to the point they came up with 3 words, put those 3 words in every marriage ceremony, and those 3 words have passed through time into many of our marriage ceremonies today. And those things are replacing adultery, emotional neglect, and physical neglect with love, honor, and keep. Now, some people thought, in first service I mentioned, somebody said, obey. I don't know where that came from. I'm seriously do not know where it came from. A couple people have found it. I mentioned it in first service, so people are immediately rushing to Google to help me out, that the Book of Common Prayer in 1549 has the word obey in it, and that's the first time we can find it. And if you're doing the math, that's 1,500 years after Jesus. So the word is not obey. The word is love, honor, and keep. And so and I think, as we walk it through, I think if you can love, honor, and keep your spouse, you got a really good shot at a good marriage. Let's just mind if we just talk through those for a while? First is love. That's physical and emotional intimacy. That's staying emotionally and physically connected. Now, next week, we're going to talk about sex, the physical part of this. It is commercial time. This is the warning. This is the scroll underneath the bar, okay? When I say we are going to talk about sex, what I mean is we are going to talk about sex. We warn people for this. We tell them ahead of time. I'll announce it the week before. Next week, Jose will announce it probably. Barry will definitely announce it when it's time for the offering. Then I'll announce it when I start the sermon. And every once in a while, there's a parent who thinks, I don't mean it. We were in the tent building. This is one of my favorite things that's ever happened. I tell this story a lot, but it was one of my favorite things because we announced it. We get up and start the sermon. I'm 2 minutes in, and this woman who was sitting in the back corner grabs her 4-year-old, throws the kid over her shoulder, and runs out of the room. Because if your kid is under 10, they're going to ask you questions on the way home that you don't want to answer. However, if your kid is around 10, 11, 12 years old, they need to be in this room. Okay? Because they already know what we're talking about. They just need to understand how we're talking about it and why. They're getting told all kinds of junk out there. I can tell you for a fact, there are people who've been in this church the church is 9.5 years old. We have people who've been in the church for close to 9 years, and they raised children who were this tall up to teenage and beyond in the church. And they have found that this sermon that I do every year, modifies slightly every year, but the same basic sermon gives them a groundwork for discussion with their children in a very difficult area. I don't know if any of you guys are like anxious to talk about this stuff with your kids. but it has provided a foundation where they can have the conversations that they need to have with their kids about this topic. So, if your kid should be in children's ministry, next week, put them in children's ministry. We got an amazing children's ministry that are going to have a better time than they'll have here anyway. If they're 11, 12, you know your kids a little bit. They know more than you do, and you think they do. Bring them here. Then intentionally don't talk about it for a few days. Okay? So that's coming. But today, let's just talk for a little bit about emotional intimacy, because we're not talking about the physical part till next week when I can embarrass you really well. Okay? There's a couple things that Paul says about emotional intimacy. First, he's not talking about marriage, but I think it applies. 1 Thessalonians 5:11. So encourage each other and build each other up, just as you're already doing. Ephesians 4:29. Let no corrupting talk come out of your mouths, but only such as is good for building up, as it fits the occasion, that you may give grace to those who hear. Let me tell you this real simply. One of the foundations for emotional intimacy is simple. Your spouse is getting beat down all the time. If they go to work, they're getting beat down. If they go on what's happening around them on TV, they're getting beat down. They're getting discouraged. Guys, your wife is being told by 1 billion billboards and 1 billion advertisements that she doesn't look like what a woman is supposed to look like. Ladies, your guy is being told he's inept and inefficient and not successful enough and not hard-charging enough or too hard-charging or whatever it is. Your spouse is being beaten down all the time. Your job at home is to build them up, to speak encouragement into your spouse. Nobody dislikes being built up. Nobody goes, oh, I hate that person. I always feel better after I talk to them. You want to create a place, and when I say emotional intimacy, what I'm primarily saying is you want to create a place where there is honesty, but where that honesty is framed by the intent to build up your partner. That your partner knows when they come in the living room, when they come in the kitchen, wherever that you come together, that they will leave the majority of the time feeling better about themselves. Not because you're avoiding real issues, but because you're attacking real issues in a positive way, in a way that builds up instead of tears down. Because like I said, the job of tearing down your spouse is taken by lots and lots and lots of people. If you start feeling like your spouse is being beaten down by you as well, you're doing it wrong. Okay? In Ephesians 5, it says this, however, each one of you must love his wife as he loves himself, and the wife must respect her husband. And I've talked about that a lot, that cycle of love and respect, and how the guy's job is to pour love into his wife, the wife pours respect onto her husband, and it just spins into a very positive marriage. And if you haven't read the book Love and Respect, I won't do a sermon on it today because I'll just tell you, read the book. I've had people grab that book, take it home, and their marriage goes from zero to hero and nothing flat, just learning that one principle of love and respect. Because what your guy needs more than anything is to be respected, and what your wife needs more than anything is to be loved. And if you're building her up in love and she's building him up in respect, you will have an emotionally intimate marriage. You will have a good marriage. Okay? That's point one, which is talking about, I better tell you what it stands for. Love is intimacy. Okay, I told you that already. Now, the next piece, honor. Honor is about fidelity, about staying faithful. That sounds too easy. That's because it is. Matthew 5:28, Jesus says, but I tell you that anyone who looks at a woman lustfully has already committed adultery with her in his heart. You ever heard anybody say men are dogs? That's a true statement. Not a complete statement, but a true statement. Men are dogs. Men are Pavlovian dogs. You know what that means? There was a guy, Pavlov, did this experiment. He had a bunch of dogs, and he would feed them, and every time he gave them food, he'd ring a bell. Food, bell, food, bell, food, bell. Got to the point the dogs were conditioned, and every time they heard the bell, they salivated whether there was food involved or not. Okay? Guys and gals are Pavlovian dogs. What feeds them makes them salivate. And guys, there are a lot of people out there trying to ring your bell. There are a lot of billboards out there trying to ring your bell. There are commercials out there trying to ring your bell. There are people at work dressing to ring your bell. If you let them ring your bell, your wife won't ring your bell anymore. This is freaky but true. If your wife stops looking as attractive to you as she did in the past, it's not because of what she's doing, it's because of what you're doing. It's because you are looking at other women and getting attraction from them, getting excitement from them, and you come home and guess what? Your wife doesn't look like an airbrushed billboard. And you're sitting there letting them ring your bell coming home to a woman who should be perfectly capable of making you feel good. Ladies, if you're reading one of those books and the guy on the cover has the shirt unbuttoned down to here and the pecs that stick out for wherever pecs stick out for, and the hair that flows to here, and you're reading these books about these guys who look like a Greek god but have feelings, and they're so sensitive. I've said this before. You know what those things are in those books? Those are women in men's bodies. That's what that is. Because they're so sensitive and loving and caring, and they never say anything negative, and they're so nice, and they're so wonderful, and all they do is want to snuggle. I shouldn't say this. Some people say it's not 100% true, but it's close enough. Guys don't come in that flavor. Okay? That's just not the way. Not saying a guy doesn't like to snuggle, but we'll cover that next week. Okay? And if you're out there and you're reading these books and this guy, this Adonis keeps showing up, and then your husband comes home from work looking nothing like a book cover, and you do the comparison, and he stops ringing your bell. Did you see what Jesus called that? Adultery. And your marriage will be less satisfying because, let's say it frankly, your marriage is less satisfying because you're perpetually committing adultery. Is that strong enough? Okay, you got that. Let's move on to the next one. And we'll leave a few things for next week. Okay? The last one, love, honor, keep. Keep is about material stuff. Keep is about a partnership. When God created women, he said, Lord said, it's not good for the man to be alone. I will make a helper suitable for him. A suitable helper. Let me give you a couple things about a suitable helper. Let's break some myths down and throw them away. First, there are very few things in the Bible that are about marriage roles that are defined very much. In other words, marriage roles aren't defined in the Bible. Very few. Let me read you this. This is Proverbs 31. Now, I want you to picture what you've been told by culture is what a good Christian wife should look like. You got this? You got it in your head, right? If you're old enough, I'm not really old enough, but I know the name June Cleaver, right? You know that? You got that picture in your head. This is what a nice, meek Christian wife is supposed to look like. Listen to this. Proverbs 31 is talking about having a good wife. And I'm just going to read you a few verses scattered throughout Proverbs 31. Listen to this first one. She inspects a field and buys it. With money she earned, she plants a vineyard. She does her work with energy, and her arms are strong. She knows what she makes is good. Her lamp burns late in the night. She's a hard worker. She welcomes the poor and helps the needy. She is strong and is respected by the people. She looks forward to the future with joy. She speaks wise words, teaches others to be kind. She watches over her family and never wastes her time. That doesn't sound like June Cleaver to me. That sounds like a nice, strong woman. Now, you guys may not have noticed this about me. I am somewhat strong-willed. I'm a little bit opinionated. I have a strong personality. I consider myself a rather emotionally strong man. You know what that means? That means for a wife, I need a really strong woman. Some of you guys, you think you're strong because you got a woman you can beat down. You want to know the sign of a real strong man? A real strong man is a man who can have a really strong wife, who can live with that woman and grow with that woman and become everything God wants you to be together because you are both strong people. This whole concept of I want a woman who just says yes all the time, that's just dumb. Matter of fact, that's my second point. Because the ability to disagree is mission critical for a successful marriage. Okay? The ability to disagree is mission critical for a successful marriage because it says suitable helper. Now, I'm a boss. I have people who work for me. I don't want anybody ever to work for me who's not willing to say no, who's not willing to say, that's a really bad idea. Because I can be stupid. I can make bad decisions. I can do things that are wrong and think I'm right the whole way in. Worse than all that, I'm passionate and articulate. If I wanted to, I could move to Alaska and make a living selling snow. I can convince people of just about, I have to watch it because I can be so passionate and so committed and so articulate and so logical that people just go, yeah, wow. And I can be dead wrong. And I have to have people in my life, especially my wife, who's willing, after one of those things, and then we can do this, and then everything comes together, and we have world peace. Who can listen to it and smile, and at the end say, yeah, that's not going to work. And here's 3 reasons that's not going to work at all. I can tell you from experience, it takes a strong person to stand up to me. Which means I have to have, like I said, a really, really, really strong wife. And dudes, if you think you're a strong man because you can discount, dismiss, beat down your wife, you are as wrong as you can be. Any weak person can tear somebody down. Any weak person can abuse somebody. Any weak, manipulative jerk can abuse somebody, make them feel bad about themselves, connive in the way they speak in such a way that it tears the person down so they have no self-esteem and can't speak back into your life. Any idiot can do that, and many idiots do. But a real man can have a real woman who can really say, bad idea, who can really disagree. If you're looking for that other woman, and you would say, I'm looking for a Christian woman who'll just be meek, and that's not Christian. You look in the Bible, you find me the women in the Bible, you go through and you point out the women in the Bible for me, and you show me the weak ones. And I'll get the strong ones to come over and kick their butts. Because A, they're stronger, and B, there's more of them. Hey, is that strong enough for you? So, that's the second thing about that partnership, that working together. Third piece of it, as a simple question. With that in mind, loving, honor, keep, forming that partnership together, how do you define a successful marriage? What's that mean? If I say, I want you to have a successful marriage, what does it mean? Now, for some people, they would say, I think this is a weird one, but some people say it, purpose of a marriage is to have kids. Which, of course, I don't think is a good idea because we had kids. We're about ready to, we're a few years away from not having kids anymore. What do you do now? So obviously that wasn't the purpose of our marriage. It's a good thing came out of our marriage. It's not the purpose of our marriage. You don't define a successful marriage by whether or not you had kids. To make me happy. The purpose of a marriage is to make me happy. Yeah, no. Can we be really honest? If you're just looking for a quick shot of happiness, exchanging rings is not the way to get it. Because marriage is work. Marriage is a challenge. Marriage is, here comes another obstacle. How do we overcome this one? Marriage is, this is difficult. Let's go through this one together. It's not looking for the easiest path. It's not about happiness. Now, some people, and I'm afraid a lot of Christians have this idea, successful marriage is one that lasts. If you've been married 50 years, that's a successful marriage. My grandmother, one of my grandmothers, was married, 30-some years to her second husband. They lived in a big old house. She slept upstairs. He slept downstairs. She told my mom once, I love him and I hate him. They never got a divorce. I am not going to call that a successful marriage. I don't think that was God's will for those two people, for them to have that marriage. I'm not saying it wasn't his will for them to be together. It was not his will for them to have that marriage. So if the purpose of marriage isn't having kids, and it isn't to be happy, and isn't just not to get a divorce, what is the purpose of marriage? Well, actually, I gave it to you at the beginning. We were talking about being single and how single works if you're centered on God. We were talking about raising kids and how raising kids works if you're raising kids who are centered on God. I wonder if we can transfer that. Could it be, since God created marriage, since God calls us into marriage, since God ordains marriage, that the purpose of marriage is for two people to continuously, over time, grow more and more centered on God? I would say yes. See, centered on God, how would we define that? We said centered on God meant holy, which means the purpose of marriage is not to make you happy. The purpose of marriage is to make you holy, to make you as a couple more and more centered on God, which, by the way, since that is what you were made for, will bring you not happiness, but joy. Not quick fixes of feeling good, but long-term satisfaction. See, if you're married, you found somebody, and you have chosen them, and they have chosen you. And if you are both followers of Christ, then the point of your marriage is for the two of you, the book of Hebrews says, to provoke each other to love and good works. And the purpose of that marriage is for the two of you to continuously provoke each other, encourage each other, challenge each other, to be more and more as a couple centered on God, to raise children who are centered on God, to be in the community, people who are centered on God, as you grow, grow, and grow, and grow, and grow. That's a successful marriage. Now, obviously, there's a big old elephant right there. Because what if one or both of you aren't followers of Christ? Now, some of you are here and you're married, but you're alone because your wife's not a follower of Christ. And I understand that pain, and I center that challenge. And I encourage you to just keep praying about it. Just keep living. In Peter, he writes, you just live your life. Don't nag your husband. It doesn't actually say the word nag in the original Greek, but in my side note it says nag. You don't nag, but you live the joy and glory of God in front of your spouse so much that eventually your spouse can't help but say, I want that. Now, it could be that you're here and you don't have a relationship with Christ. And you're wanting a good marriage, but you're not a Christian. You're not a follower of Christ. Well, you can't have a God-centered life You can't have a God-centered marriage if you don't have a God-centered life. And so today might be the day that you're finally ready to have a relationship with Christ. Because of what Jesus did for you on the cross, so that he died so you could have a relationship with him, it's really simple. And here we make it as easy as possible. We've got these blue bags, some here and here and there and there. And if you grab a blue bag, we've got people that are trained, and they'll come to you, they'll take 7 to 10 minutes. And they'll walk you through the contents of the bag, and they'll show you how to have that relationship with Christ. How to grow to become the person God wants you to be, so that if you're married, you can, as a couple, grow into the couple God wants you to be. If you're single, so you can have a life that's centered on him. It could be you've accepted Christ, you've never been baptized. Well, if you're going to have a life centered on God, you have to have a life where you've proclaimed that centering to everybody else. And that's what baptism is. It is the proclamation, I am a follower of God. One of the coolest things I ever get to see here is when we baptize a couple. That's just so cool. 2 people saying, we're going to center our lives on God. Because that gives them a real shot at a successful marriage. It could be that you've been reminded of the value of marriage today, and you want to take communion together as a couple. You're both here. There's a station in the back and one in the front where you can go and take communion together and acknowledge, or maybe your spouse isn't here and you want to take communion and remember the potential that you have. Maybe you want to go pray about it. Maybe because as a couple you want to go pray. Maybe as a person who doesn't have your partner's not with them and with you, and you want to pray for your partner. You want to go do that at the cross over there. There's people over here who'll be glad to pray with you if you'd like. You just grab one of them and they'll pray with you. See, our culture is going to continually tell you that Mr. Right is out there, that Miss Perfect is there ready to make your dreams come true. And personally, I like God's way better, where I'm not waiting for somebody else to make my dreams come true, but where I'm choosing one person, and we're going to hold hands, and we're going to move toward God, and we're going to make our dreams come true.